welcome everybody to the webinar today. My name is Bronwyn Edwards. I'm the CEO of Roses in the Ocean, and I had the privilege of being involved in this particular co-design. And with me today is Carrie Lumby. So, Carrie.
Hi everyone, I'm Carrie. I'm a member of the Roses in the Ocean facilitation team, particularly around the co-design of these safe haven services, and it's lovely to be here.
So first of all, we'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we're all meeting today in various locations, and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. We'd also like to acknowledge people with a lived experience of suicide, and thank you all so much for the courage that you show every day in turning up and bringing your expertise and insights to really important work like this particular co-design process. We'd also like to acknowledge, of course, that many health professionals bring a lived experience of suicide to their work, and many others are impacted by suicide in the work that you do. And we thank you all for the role that you've taken and played in this co-design process. So we're going to share our screen now and take you through, an overview of a lot of the co-design outputs to date, and in particular, the work that was done in the last session. So bear with us for just a moment while we share our screen, and we will be underway. All right. So let's just do a quick recap for everybody in terms of what the process has looked like for the Southern New South Wales LHD Safe Haven co-design. So we have had a range of small focus groups, conversations where we've really focused on exploring different stages of people accessing help when they've been experiencing significant emotional distress or suicidal crisis. So we've had those focus groups with people with lived experience of suicide, and also health professionals and other stakeholders. We have then all come together in a joint co-design session and worked through a number of scenarios in that group session, which we're going to provide an overview of today. Here we are in the live webinar and an online survey that will follow today. Really, really, really important part of the process. It's an opportunity for those of you who have taken part in the co-design to date to make sure, give us a bit of a sense check, make sure that we've heard you correctly, and also, you may well have thought of other things that you'd like to contribute to this process since we last caught up. And so that's your opportunity to do so. But also more broadly, we really hope that this survey is circulated wide and far across the Southern New South Wales region, so that more community members and people who work in that space can also contribute to all of the inputs and the final service model. So after the survey is complete, all of that will be collated and a draft model will be produced and provided to the local health district. And then we will be back sort of 3 to 6 months after the doors open to do a post-implementation day, which is a really critical part of co-design. As being an iterative process, it's very, very important that we continue to learn and involve the voices of people who've actually been guests at your safe haven in that process too. So that's where we've been and where we're up to. So today we're going to present some of the findings that have been captured from that co-design process so far. We're really looking to gather some broader insight regarding previous experience of people accessing ED, those various touch points, the needs to be met via the safe haven, and the values to guide the local safe haven. We'll show you where discussions have led to that point. We'll go through the workshopping of scenarios, as I said before, and in that survey, really designing, having your ability to input further into that final design of your local safe haven. So the touch points that we began walking through these different touch points, as we call them, when people are looking to access help. And we're walking through the emotions and feelings that are experienced by a person seeking help through ED, or supporting someone to do so. as well as those really important voices that we need to hear from, the people who choose not to go to ED or who wouldn't go again because of prior experiences. We really ask people to tap into their feelings. That allows us to explore the reasons behind why you were feeling that way as well, and to really start to identify and highlight what the unmet needs were that sit underneath the feelings and experiences that you shared with us. And then ideally how the safe haven can actually meet those needs. The different touch points that we looked at was just finding, when people were at a point where they're thinking, I really need to get some help here. What was that like trying to find that help? Arrival and initial assessment, the waiting, treatment, and when you were leaving the ED. So the following slides really highlight the key points of discussion and feedback from that first phase of the co-design process. Everything that was shared in the conversations has been captured in a very large amount of detail that will be available to the LHD, of course, and it's been thematically analysed and synthesised down to represent the most common themes that we'll share with you here today.
Thanks, Bronnie. So I'm going to talk you through now these touch points, as Bronnie said, to share what we heard from both people with lived experience and health professionals in these smaller focused conversations that we had around what their feelings were in terms of their current experiences, either accessing an emergency department when experiencing a suicidal crisis, supporting someone to do so, like a family or friend, being in that caring role, and then also what it's like to be trying to provide the very best care for people in crisis if you're a professional working in the system. And we'd really encourage people to stop and pause. This is a recorded webinar if you want to look in more detail, and it is important to dig into the detail if you're really wanting to understand everything that we heard, but I'll just emphasize some of the key things that we've heard through quotes that we've captured. Thanks, Bronnie. So in terms of the finding, which is that first reaching out for help, looking for help through an ED, perhaps someone actually finding help for you, which is sometimes people's experiences. So from a lived experience perspective, we heard someone say, depending on the day, they're not treated in any way compassionately. And that also that experience of reaching out for help through an ED actually amplified all the feelings that I had that made me want to end my life. And then from the health professional perspective, we heard that someone said one thing the ED does offer is that it's okay for anyone to walk through that door. So in principle, it has that no wrong door approach, and that is helpful. Someone else said that once you know what it's like, you're cautious of sending people there, but you know it's all that's there at this point in time. Thanks, Bronnie. And then in terms of arrival and initial assessment, that sometimes looks like triage for people. So from the lived experience perspective, we heard, and this was actually a common thing, we heard there's no quiet area to go. Someone also shared with us that I've sat at the nurse's station restrained to a chair with everyone able to see me. Someone else said they don't listen to the families as much as they could. And someone else captured the experience by saying, you're not a patient, you're just a problem. And then from the health professional perspectives, a health professional told us that some EDs will put people with presenting mental health issues in a different basket and think they're difficult. Someone else said that it's a little heartbreaking when someone wants to end their life and they're being told, hold on, we just have to handle all this other stuff. And then someone shared, a health professional shared their experience of actually taking and supporting someone that they'd been supporting for a while, and they said that she had lots of male police officers around her and she's a tiny 18-year-old. I'm not okay seeing someone being stood over. Thanks. And then we asked people to share what it felt like to be waiting or supporting someone in that wait. We know that very critical time, which is the waiting period. So from a lived experience perspective, someone said in an ED, realistically, it's a 3 or 4 hour wait, and that's on a good day. Someone else said that this person is just being left because it isn't important enough. And then someone else said, you're sitting at the end of the line at the same with the guy with the sprained ankle. From the health professionals, we heard there is this pressure from multiple points on getting the person out. That person is sitting alone with that distress with no option for sensory modulation or anything, just sitting in that cold, dark room. And then another health professional said, someone has been in ED for hours and it's not good enough. We feel frustrated because we know that's the process. Thanks. And then in terms of treatment, and we know that that looks different for people. It may be treatment within ED. It may be that some person might be actually given an inpatient admission. So from the lived experience perspective, someone said there's a lot of shame there for them, no respect, not treating people as human. The room is uninviting, very basic, uncomfortable, not enough blankets and no privacy. Then someone else, alternative to those sort of more negative experience, they said, once I was admitted, I felt a bit of relief. And someone just saying, I don't feel safe here. Then from a health professional perspective, a health professional said that even when I've had people request to stay in hospital, there's never enough beds. Another person told us that the inpatient unit, they just want to fix the person and get them out. They don't look at the person and their family. There's not a holistic framework. And then someone else saying, I find it very challenging that I can't do what I think is best practice to have that person in a nice space and be able to talk to them calmly. And then we know as well that leaving is a particularly critical point across those touch points of going through an ED process. From a lived experience perspective, we heard someone who was caring for their mum saying mum had absolutely no follow-up. Another person from a caring perspective said, you're left with this feeling of what do I do with him now? And then in terms of something that's quite specific to the local area, we heard a number of times, and this is a quote about this, is the biggest problem in Bega Valley is you can't drive. If you can't drive, good luck getting home. From the health professionals, we heard one person say, I feel really unsettled because you're wondering, please don't be doing something to hurt yourself. And then also another saying, we have little cards made up with crisis lines, which works well for some people, but other people won't really engage with a phone call, and that's understandable. Thanks, Tony. And then we also, it's super important to capture the experiences of people who either have never accessed ED or would not go back there as a result of their previous experiences. We wanted to hear from them. And the lived experience perspectives there was, one person told us that sitting in a waiting room for 8 hours would make me more suicidal, so I just don't go. Another person said that stigma and shame of being taken to ED by police escort is a barrier to them seeking help through that process. Someone also said that you're asking for help, but that help doesn't treat you in a very human way. And then a 3-hour drive to ED where I might not get admitted to then just come home. Health professionals told us that one person said that it makes me wary to make that call now, sending police or ambulance to their house. It would make things 10 times worse, but still not getting the outcome we're wanting. And then this was a very interesting perspective from a health professional who shared with us that literally it's the last place I want to send people is the hospital, but I also know it's the only place. It's frustrating that I have to put my professional opinion and my name to tell them to go somewhere I wouldn't go myself. Thanks, Bronnie. And then on the basis of that, as Bronwyn said earlier, we get people to explore their feelings and why they're feeling that way, because generally when there are strong emotions, what they're reflective of is unmet needs that are sitting behind those feelings. And so we've captured here for you in a few different domains, what are the needs of people to be met by the Safe Havens? We really explored this with the people with lived experience that are participating in this co-design. In terms of experience, what the needs are is to be treated with dignity and their human rights to be respected, to be asked about your own experiences and really listened to. Family members are involved and listened to in line with guest wishes, clear communication about what to expect and what will happen next, not having to wait for support, to not be stared at, a focus on holistic needs, the ability to work through thoughts, have time to reflect and leave feeling positive and hopeful. In terms of what we're calling the practical and physical needs that people are hoping that the Safe Haven will be able to meet, so that it's an aesthetically pleasing environment, not a clinical environment, able to meet immediate needs such as just need for food, for the bathroom and for warmth. So those basic physical needs. That it's a safe and comfortable environment. There's a capacity to connect to the outdoors. There's something to distract and take your mind off things, for example, art. That people are treated with empathy, and there's care for what's happening for the guest, and also in terms of practical support, a way of getting home. Thank you. And then we asked people to talk about what are the unmet needs in terms of connection. And that was, people told us that there's a need for emotional support from people who understand from their own lived experience of suicidal crisis, and knowledge and suggestions about what might be helpful, ability to connect and talk with other people, that the service has a holistic understanding of mental health and wellbeing, and that people are able to leave with their own skills and to build the capacity to support themselves. And then also to be asked about their experiences and to really be listened to and to be heard. And then connection to other supports, being available if that's what people want. And certainly if people want as well, some follow-up upon leaving. Thanks, Bronnie. And then, as Bronwyn said, we workshopped some scenarios. So the final session we had was a combined session. So that was people with lived experience working together with health professionals to work through these scenarios that are likely to be encountered in the local safe haven, to really test the way of working against the values and principles that we know the safe haven needs to hold itself to. And Bronnie will be telling you about those values soon. And thanks, Bronwyn. And these are just the scenarios. So people watching this webinar who didn't participate directly can understand the purpose of the scenarios that we went through. So scenario 1 was to determine how people under 18 will be supported when seeking help through the safe haven. Also, how would the safe haven support guests within organisational constraints such as limited opening hours, and what the scope and nature of support is to guests beyond direct support with the safe haven. Scenario 2, Leanne, that was about determining how the safe haven will work with guests who appear to be intoxicated, how the local safe haven will work with guests whose distress may express itself as aggression, and to determine the ways in which the SP peer workers, so the specialist peer workers who'll be working in the service, will manage the competing needs of guests. In scenario 3, what we worked through was how the safe haven supports guests who identify as experiencing suicidal distress as a direct result of what clinicians would understand as symptoms associated with psychosis. Also to determine what non-clinical support might look like in the context of supporting guests with a diagnosis of what would be described as a serious mental illness, and then also to determine the local safe haven's approach to supporting carers or the natural supports of people in crisis, including what other potential supports could be offered to carers and natural supports themselves. And then scenario 4, the purpose of that was to determine how the local safe haven will respond to guests who are characterised as at imminently of risk of suicide, and then also what would the SP peer workers need in order to effectively support such guests. So Bronwyn, I'll just hand it over to Bronwyn now, and she'll take you through what was generated out of those conversations.
Thanks so much, Carrie. Okay, so as you can imagine, there was an enormous amount of discussion around each of those scenarios, and it brings out a lot of really good issues for conversation and to work through. So what we're going to show you now is actually what we know so far from the lived experience and health professional focus conversations, the lived experience group co-design session, and then the combined session, which incorporated the discussions around all of those different scenarios. We use, first of all, before we go there, just let me share with you the values of the safe haven. So back at the end of 2019, when there was a very large scale, the beginning of sort of co-design for the ministry to determine the statewide requirements for the safe havens, the values on the left-hand side was what came out of that big session, which was full of health professionals, other stakeholders and people with lived experience. So they were talking about those values in terms of person-centred being risk-tolerant, non-judgmental, welcome. You can see the whole list there, dignity, empowerment and what have you. We then did some work in the lived experience group co-design session around potential values for this particular safe haven in southern New South Wales. So the values highlighted are inclusivity, being non-judgmental, respect, confidentiality, trust, that it's a person-driven service, honesty, openness and transparency, dignity, hopeful, empathy and understanding, and safety. So you can see the ones that are just bolded there, the first three, and then towards the bottom, the dignity and hopeful, were the ones that were most highlighted by people in the group, and they also actually relate across to a number of the values from the ministry's guidelines as well. So that is some work that can continue as the safe haven model forms, and as hopefully there's an ongoing process of co-design that occurs. The draft principles that were also developed as part of the ministry's statewide requirements talk about leadership by people with lived experience of suicide, safety and accessibility, a non-clinical model, recovery-orientated support, transparency, translation of co-design outputs to the service delivery. So that's that real guardianship of the service model representing what comes out of co-design, and using person-centred language. So the principles of your local safe haven will continue to be developed and refined through that post-implementation workshop that we spoke about earlier as well. And I guess this really speaks to the outputs from all of the conversation that we've had, that we've now sort of combined into what we call a traffic light system. You're probably fairly familiar with this type of way of grouping alignment. So anything that we see in the coming slides in a green text, it means that there's really good alignment between the Ministry of Health guidelines and statewide requirements, along with people with lived experience and the health professionals, so all from those co-design participants. When there's an orange text, it just means there's further discussion needed to explore any divergence that's currently still sitting there at the end of this process. And anything is red is out of scope according to the New South Wales Ministry of Health guidelines. And I guess it's just so important at this point just to highlight again that co-design is an iterative process. It really does have to be a continuous improvement space. And it's important to, I think, just also recognise that sometimes there are parameters and boundaries that you are faced with in co-design that can be, you know, from as simple as resourcing issues and available infrastructure and what have you. And that what comes out now, it's why it's so important, even in the co-design process where there are some parameters, that we still enable and encourage people to think big and to dream blue sky, because of the nature of co-design being iterative. If we know what people ultimately want, you know what you're aiming for in terms of future versions of the safe haven. So it's important to keep that in mind as well. All right, so if we look at the location of the safe space, this is a really good example, I guess, of what I've just been talking about, and that need to dream blue sky, but also to be aware of some limitations when things start out. So in terms of statewide requirements, on the left-hand side, it can be located on or off hospital or health grounds within proximity to the emergency department, so that you don't have to travel a long distance. Really represent a genuine alternative to accessing the hospital. Yeah, sites can be sort of the identification of sites has been something that the LHDs have been able to be working on for some time, because it can take time. So there's clear congruence there in terms of people wanting, you know, a house with rooms, so a place that's very non-clinical and has that really welcoming feel about it, ideally in the countryside. In the orange there is an indication that the initial location will be in Bega, but that's to be determined. And so, you know, there is obviously room for ongoing discussion with the community about where else, you know, future safe havens might be, because there's certainly been a lot of conversation about where else they could be particularly useful. Connection pathways to the safe haven. In terms of the statewide requirements, the ministry there is saying there's no requirement for people to present to an ED prior to accessing the service, and that guests attending the service are not required to undertake any assessments or meet eligibility criteria. That there's a no wrong door approach with the service welcoming everybody. And you'll see that the reason for the scenarios and the way in which those scenarios are developed is really to encourage people to be thinking about how is the safe haven a no wrong door, and how is it meeting the needs of anyone who arrives in line with the values and principles. And that services are promoted in the local community so that people are aware of it, and they're aware of when the service can be provided and what have you. So as you'll see, there's a lot of green there, which is fantastic. And there really was within this LHD a strong alignment between people with lived experience and the health professionals and other stakeholders. So everyone is agreeing that they really want that space to be welcoming. So when people arrive, they're welcomed, they're introduced into the space straight away. There's no waiting around. There's no cost and no exclusion because of lack of identification or residency status or anything. And that it really is a genuine no wrong door approach, regardless of age, intoxication, mental diagnosis, etc. But that the service will have really strong support connections, relationships in community, so they can really connect people to the support that is that they're looking for. That you're able to ring ahead or just knock on the door, able to visit as frequently as someone wants to, timely support, limit the wait time as much as possible, hopefully that everyone can literally just be introduced into the space straight away, and that there may be various ways of communicating the service through different formats. Now, the only thing there in orange that you'll see there is the comment around peer support workers to reside in ED and connect people to the safe haven. So once again, that's really just something for you as a collective group in community to continue conversations and see whether that's something that can actually, that you can make work. In terms of outward connections and partnerships, from a statewide requirements perspective from the New South Wales Ministry of Health, the service is connected closely or jointly delivered with community organisations, including other support services and local businesses, that people will be actively supported to determine for themselves how best to stay safe and supported to access additional services of their choice. That guests that present with a clear and immediate risk to the safety of staff or other people in the service will be connected with more appropriate support or other support to assist them. And that clear protocols will be in place to support staff to make decisions about safety and access. So as you can see, once again, lots of green there, very strong support for connections in and out of the safe space. Geographical implications, I think, really, when you look at the in the orange there, they're providing or arranging for guests a way of getting home safely. You know, how do people get home? There is the tyranny of distance that you're dealing with, and maybe it's a further discussion clearly in terms of, is there any other community service? Is there any other thing, thinking outside the box, what can you come up with in terms of helping guests to get home from the safe haven? And follow up about leaving. You know, what does that follow up look like? What's going to be possible with the staffing hours and what have you, but how is that going to be provided through the service is another area just up for discussion. But other than that, you know, really strong networks connecting to both the hospital and clinical services and other services, just dependent upon what people are wanting, what they're needing for those underlying issues that are contributing to their distress. Making sure the safe space is a really good resource hub, you know, a list of resources and information when people leave, so that people are leaving away with some additional info that might help them, that's actually relevant to why they've come. And, you know, in some cases, acknowledging that an outward connection to ED, it may be the most appropriate, but in line with the ministry's requirements that, you know, that they're actively supported to determine for themselves what that best next step is. But other than that, really pretty good alignment. When we look at the service model, you'll see there it's all green. So from a Ministry of Health statewide requirements, they were looking for these to be met, that clinical services are not provided, that what is delivered in the service must be non-clinical, that there's a focus on responding to psychosocial reasons for the person's need for support, including loneliness and isolation, that family and friends are involved wherever possible and in alignment with the wishes of the person who's using the service, and that people can access information about a wide range of other community-based services such as housing, relationship counselling, financial assistance to help address that cause of distress, and that they're warmly connected to them. So very strong alignment, as you can see, people wanting people to be treated with dignity, with their human rights are respected, that you're making people feel safe and acknowledged and validated in their decision to come to the safe haven. And asking guests what safe is to them and what do they need to feel safe, acknowledging that it's going to be different for different people. Identifying guest needs and helping to make a plan for the next steps, involving family members, clear communication, really coming at the service from a strengths-based approach, holistic needs are being considered, just the ability to give guests time to just be and reflect, connect and talk with other guests, providing information and suggestions around self-management, regulation and what have you, being asked and listened to. These are the things that you've seen come through from the focus group conversations as well. I think in that service model there, it speaks to how you will actually design out your physical setting so that people have the ability to talk to other guests, but they also have that opportunity to talk in a private space. And that comes down to, as I say, location and how you design and lay out that physical space. So when we come to staffing, from the Ministry's statewide requirements, it states that the service is staffed by suicide prevention peer workers with a lived experience of suicidal crisis and a non-clinical service without clinical services delivered in the safe haven. In the actual perspectives from the co-design process to date, so you'll see in the green there that peer workers to have their own direct lived experience of suicide, only peer workers within staffing model, staff who understand trauma-informed care, that staff dress in plain clothes, no uniform, so it's just really casual and people just feel like they're coming to meet with someone who is a companion. Adequate resourcing regarding staffing, and that staff display empathy and compassion. In the orange is a request in there about including a peer worker with a lived experience of being a carer. So just looking at that, where there's been very strong support for families and carers, significant others to be provided support and welcome to the safe haven in line with the wishes of the person experiencing the distress. But then the suggestion was, well, can we have a peer worker who has a lived experience of being a carer? In orange, simply because of some of the parameters in place from funding in terms of the number of staff that are able to be had, but definitely a conversation worth continuing. The line there in red, which is include a clinician working alongside peer workers as part of a staffing model, there has been an indication by the LHD during the co-design process that the Southern New South Wales LHD have sought permission to have a clinician working alongside peer workers. So that is something that is going to just have to be, I guess, further discussions, and that's something that is across to the LHD because they have sort of sought that permission from the ministry to divert from those statewide requirements. Now, if we go onto the workforce development and support, you'll see once again really great alignment between what people with lived experience of suicide are asking for and what health professionals and other stakeholders are also hoping that this safe haven can do. So from the Ministry of Health statewide requirements, ongoing training, supervision, mentoring and group reflection opportunities to support the skill development and promote the personal recovery and professional growth of suicide prevention peer workers, And training and support is provided as per the Ministry of Health Suicide Prevention Peer Workforce Guidelines. So you'll see there on the right-hand side from the co-design process, very strong support for ongoing training, supervision, mentoring, group reflection for staff, well-defined scope of practice for the peer workers, that the peer support staff are able to access support and supervision from clinicians, the involvement of clinicians about workforce support, not control, and that staff are trained in a whole range of things, including de-escalation and managing people presenting with varying levels of risk, managing intoxication and ensuring safety for all, violence prevention, clinical mental illness diagnosis, trauma-informed care, and holistic care. I'll just note too, on the clinical mental illness diagnosis, that was in the context of the peer workers just having a broad understanding of the various mental illness diagnoses. It wasn't about them actually doing the diagnosing. So just wanted to clarify that. Excuse me. So the last one was the second last one, physical environment and accessibility. So from the statewide requirements from the ministry, accessible outside of business hours, and that the environment is welcoming, safe and calm. This includes cultural, spiritual and emotional safety and the provision of trauma-informed care. So lots of green, again, aesthetically pleasing, comfortable environment. People are feeling safe. It's homely, it's non-clinical. The facilities are there to meet immediate needs like food, tea, coffee, bathroom, warmth. An outdoor space. Activities available for distraction as well. So for those who'd like to just distract themselves through some art or sensory tools, sensory room, potentially a soundproof room. A mix of private and open spaces, comfortable lounges and furniture. Security system or duress alarm. So there was good conversation through the scenarios and really good agreement that people were not wanting security guards at the safe haven, really recognising the negative impact that would have on many people, but definitely still very cognizant of wanting to make sure that guests and staff are safe. And so the idea of a duress alarm system being embedded in the safe haven was agreed upon. Areas to pace and be active. So this is once again speaking to that, really thinking about different types of needs that different people will need, even within just the physicality of the space. That it's designed also to be accessible for people with disabilities, and that the space is visually welcoming and accessible to First Nations community members, and that there's adequate resourcing regarding equipment and facilities. The only things in orange are just areas for further conversation to see whether it can happen. That it's open or that staff are available 24/7. This is, of course, one of the hard parameters that we come up against at the moment in this early iteration of safe havens in New South Wales. There's not the staffing resources to be open 24/7. So conversation to be had around what are the best hours for it to be open with the staffing that you have available to yourselves. That support animals could be included in the space. So just need time to have more conversation around that. And that spaces are specifically designed and tailored to young people's needs and wants. And what needs to be done to really understand how that space can really welcome a whole range of different people, different guests who may like to utilise it. And finally, on the governance side, from the ministry's statewide requirements, they require clear governance and reporting lines within the health service to provide oversight and support. Governance structure, which provides a clear process to actively support suicide prevention peer workers when and how additional clinical supports may be needed. Ongoing opportunities for lived experience involvement, including a communication channel for guest feedback. Transparent about all policies and procedures, and outcome reporting to the Ministry of Health includes relevant indicators. So lots of alignment once again. In terms of information, there was agreement that guests should be given the choice whether to share their information and history, and that staff explain honestly and openly why there is a need to collect some information and how it will be used. Establish a process and procedure for managing intoxication and aggression, have clear escalation pathways in place, and know when they should be enacted. That First Nations community members involved in ongoing consultation and governance of the safe haven, that there's clear protocols regarding flexibility of the service model, opening hours, etc., and that there are strategies and protocols for supporting people with psychotic diagnosis. Just in the orange there, respecting people's choices, including their dignity of risk. It's always a challenging conversation for some health professionals, but it's a really important one to be had. And that policies and procedures are needed for managing adolescents and young people. So it was just an acknowledgement that people do want this to be a no wrong door. They do want to be able to support young people if they come, but needing to make sure that there's the appropriate policies and procedures in place and the appropriate connections to other support that may be really helpful for adolescents and young people. Over to you, Carrie.
Thanks, Bronnie. So we got people at the end of the session to tell us what their non-negotiables are for the local safe haven. Obviously, as Bronnie has said, this is an iterative process, and the way in which the local safe haven is now, the model will evolve and grow, but we're wanting to hear from people, what are the real priorities for this local safe haven? And so these are the list that was generated in that conversation. Empathy and understanding, making sure the staff working in the safe haven have lived experience and knowledge required for the role. Training on trauma-informed and holistic care and practice. Safety, whatever that means for the person, for guests and staff. Integrity of the program or the service model remains in place with a commitment to the core principles. There's support for staff with training, supervision and consultation with clinicians if that's needed, for the peer workers to take care of people and support them to work in a bureaucracy. A holistic approach, a space that's created that has compassion, empathy and unconditional positive regard. A holistic approach to safety as well. So that's come up a few times, the idea that safety is a broader concept than just physical safety. It's psychological, emotional. People also talked about cultural safety. Support for staff to do the work and to not face compassion fatigue. So there was a lot of consideration around a peer workforce not just being effective, but needing, to ensure the sustainability, both at an individual level and a workforce level. A non-hierarchical environment where there is the opportunity for reflective learning together. Having clinicians associated with the safe haven who acknowledge the importance of trauma-informed care and practice. People with disabilities are welcomed and well catered for. That it feels like a comfortable home where people have their own private space or to be there comfortably together. So that flexibility of space for people, and then supports all people and their carers. And again, that it's a culturally welcoming space. And it was emphasised again, the importance of having the First Nations communities in this space and to help to guide its governance, and that the space is adequately resourced in an ongoing way. And this choice for guests is sort of a core guiding principle of the local safe haven. Thanks, Bronnie. So that's about it in terms of the outputs that we wanted to share with you today. Next steps from here. So this is part of the feedback loop. We've had this webinar. The survey will now be open, and that is open until the 26th of July. So there's sort of two main purposes of that survey. One is to get a sense check from the co-design participants, some of whom have joined us today. So thank you for joining us, and we really encourage you to follow up with the survey. Want to check that we've accurately reflected what you told us during the active co-design process, anything you'd like to add, but super important to spread the word. We know that co-design processes, particularly an accelerated one like this that's online, there's only a limited capacity to have people directly involved, and we really need to hear from the broader community. Obviously, the broader and more diverse community input, the more likely that the service model that's produced out of the co-design process and that's going to be implemented will meet those more diverse needs and the unique needs of your local communities. So really encourage you to send the link and share it with your formal and informal networks. There's more information on the Roses website on your on the Southern LHD landing page if you need more detail. And then, Bronnie, I'll hand it over to you to wrap up. You're on mute.
Sorry, I will just stop sharing now and we'll just come back to screen. And I just wanted to check see if there's any questions in the chat space. Just some comments. Been a privilege to be part of the co-design. Really appreciate the manner in which we've thoughtfully done this. Thank you for the feedback. This LHD has had such a great bunch of committed, generous local people who've contributed to the process. So that's lovely. So look, thank you all so much for joining us. As Carrie just said, it is great to know that you're there and you can really spread this far and wide. And we really look forward to seeing your feedback on the survey and hopefully lots of other community members as well. So we'll be keeping an eye on that until the 26th of July. We wish you all the best for transferring these fantastic co-design outputs into a service model, and we absolutely will be very excited to be able to come and see the new beginning and come and visit the Safe Haven once it's up and running, and look forward to being back hopefully face to face in community for the post-implementation co-design. So thank you all, take care of yourselves, and we shall see you all again soon. Thank you.
Bye.